record, everyone please take your seats. Mr. Giesman, go ahead.
Mr. Palmisano, we're on SCE 21, the third paragraph of the first. The third paragraph of that first page of the letter from Mr. Dietrich to Mr. Yamachi. And I go down to the third sentence in that third paragraph. Mr. Dietrich says, but 10 months have elapsed since the Unit 3 steam generator tube leak, and no such repairs or replacements have occurred, and no viable repair or replacement strategy has been proposed. Are you familiar with this phrasing when Mr. Dietrich sent the letter?
Well, I read the phrasing when he sent the letter, yes.
Could you explain to me how you could go 10 months since the steam generator tube leak and have allowed a circumstance where no viable repair or replacement strategy had even been proposed?
You're asking me how MHI could have allowed that?
I'm asking you how you could have allowed that situation to deteriorate so badly with all of the millions of dollars of costs incurred before getting tough with MHI.
Objection, argumentative.
I'll rephrase, Your Honor. How could MHI have allowed that, Mr. Palmisano?
Objection, Your Honor. Foundation. He's asking about MHI.
Yeah. Mr. Palmisano, what's your opinion of how MHI could have allowed that to develop?
Objection, relevance.
Mr. Giesman, yeah, I sustain the objection. Let's keep this focused on 2012 costs as directly as possible.
Mr. Palmisano, how would you explain to Edison and San Diego's customers who bore the costs for your repair and replacement activities during 2012 and to continue to pay a revenue requirement for San Onofre during 2012 despite the fact that the plant stopped generating in January of 2012 without a viable repair or replacement strategy having been proposed by late November of 2012?
Objection, argumentative.
I think I'll overrule that one. I didn't find that argumentative.
That was a fairly long question. Can you just give me a quick summary of that, please? And I'll do my best.
How would you explain this circumstance to your customers?
Here's how I would explain it to my customers. If you look at the paragraph you're citing, starting with the but 10 months have elapsed, go on to the next paragraph where we say the situation is not and should not be acceptable to either of our companies. We then go on to say SCE's customers, ratepayers, and state regulators, and I would include San Diego Gas and Electric customers, rely upon songs for electrical supply, for the reliability of the grid. So what we are doing in these two paragraphs is, number one, making sure MHI clearly at a senior level understands the significance of what the problem has caused to our customers and our other stakeholders, telling them it's unacceptable, and we've put this in writing at a fairly senior level. That's how I would explain it to our customers, our shareholders, any other stakeholders.
The top of that next page, 3 lines down, says, surely you understand and agree that a situation in which repairs or even a repair plan for the steam generators remain unknown is not in the interest of either of our companies. What did Edison mean by that?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. This is outside the scope. We're now getting into debates about what happened between Edison and Mitsubishi. I thought we were here to talk about costs. There hasn't been a linkage to costs.
Sustained.
Your Honor, I understand why Edison has suppressed this document throughout this proceeding, and that it was only delivered this morning.
There's been no suppression, Your Honor.
Okay. Yeah, but please resume your questioning, Mr. Giesman.
The second bullet in those three bulleted items further down the page, Mr. Palmisano,
Yes.
demands a return within a short time frame, all 4 steam generators to service at 100% rated electric power under the song's upright conditions. What did Edison envision by the phrase a short time frame?
Objection, Your Honor. Scope.
Sustained.
Let's go on to SCE 17.
I have that.
Could you describe what this is?
Let me review the attachment here.
Off the record.
I'm ready.
Would you describe what the letter is?
Off the record. Just a second. On the record.
Mr. Palmisano, would you describe what Exhibit SCE 17 is?
SCE 17 is a letter from Mitsubishi Nuclear Energy Systems. Mr. Yamuchi, President and CEO of Mitsubishi Nuclear Energy Systems, to Mr. Peter Dietrich, the Senior Vice President and Chief Nuclear Officer for Southern California Edison.
Would it be fair to consider this a reply to SCE 21?
Yes, it is.
In that first paragraph in Mr. Yamachi's letter, the second sentence, he says, in your letter, Southern California Edison also expresses concern over the time that it is taking. Did Edison have a concern over the time that it was taking?
Objection, Your Honor. Scope. There's been no linkage to cost, Your Honor.
Sustained, but Mr. Giesman, I'm going to allow you to continue the line of questioning, but do try and bring it back to costs.
I'm looking.
Exhibit 17, yes, that one, sir.
Yes. It was distributed the other day. I can get you that.
Oh, yes.
I'm looking at the 3 legs of paragraph 4 of Judge Darling's order to Edison to produce SCE 10. And the chronological timeline is supposed to identify dates that Edison gained key knowledge about the shutdown, made key operational decisions, and commenced key operational actions. And I think all of these questions have lied within those three legs, and they all relate to costs.
I disagree. They don't relate to any of the three.
Since it was my ruling, I'll respond. I think that I'm inclined to sustain the objection because on this ground. These letters are not, they're talking about future actions that are anticipated going forward. There's been no questioning, no linkage, no foundation to did Edison take information from these letters and use it as a basis for an action or a key operational decision or an expenditure, which is what the exhibit order requested. Furthermore, I mean, because these letters come out late in the year, I mean, I'm not sure what a president-to-president please behave letter tells us, but these letters, up to the point that they actually provide repair options, which can then be linked to actions, decisions, or expenditures. I'm not sure how you're going to loop this into relevance into Phase 1.
Your Honor, if I may, the absence of, and I can quote any of the phrases, a viable repair plan, the absence of a viable replacement strategy calls into question the prudence of all of the expenditures prior to the presence of such a plan.
And you're certainly free to argue that, and you've made that point repeatedly, but there's nowhere else to go with it, Mr. Giesman, unless you want to link it to specific actions, decisions, or expenditures.
I'm simply trying to confirm the non-existence of any plan or any strategy for long-term repair or replacement of either the two steam generators in Unit 2 or the two steam generators in Unit 3.
And how does that relate to 2012 expenditures? These repair, you can make what you want of it, the fact that long-term repair options are not provided by Mitsubishi until the tail end of 2012. It's relevant to whether they acted on that information that they got December 14th or December 28th, but it's not taking you anywhere in terms of back into earlier in 2012. You can certainly argue that maybe you want to argue that because they had no long-term repair problem, it was imprudent to do anything. That's an argument you can make, but it doesn't make it relevant here to talk about long-term repair plans that are going to be implemented or not after 2012.
Can I ask if Edison will then stipulate to the absence of any long-term repair plan throughout 2012?
Well, I would first say that I'm not sure that that's the facts and evidence. You can try and see if you come up with an objection.
Why don't you ask him that question?
Ask him that question.
Will Southern California Edison Company stipulate to the absence of any long-term repair or replacement plan throughout calendar 2012 with respect to either Unit 2 or Unit 3?
Absolutely not. We've worked diligently on a strategy for long-term repair.
Your Honor, that's why I've been pursuing this line of questioning. I don't think they agree with my perspective about the absence of such a plan.
Well, you may read this language to say that Edison is saying nobody's got any plan. Another person might read this as saying, MHI, how come you don't have your plan together that's subject to warranty claims? So I don't think that you've established, by virtue of these exhibits, that Edison has admitted it had no plan whatsoever. What you've established is that someone at Edison wrote to someone at Mitsubishi and said, Mitsubishi, how come you don't have any plans for us yet? We have a warranty. So that's a different interpretation. You're free to argue it. You're free to inquire about it.
Your Honor, in light of the concerns that I expressed at the beginning of my questioning in terms of inadequate time to prepare on these exhibits because of the way in which they were delivered to me, can I cede my time to some of the other parties, and come back subsequently with further questions.
So my question is, did you make a data request for any letters, any correspondence between Edison and Mitsubishi?
We went over yesterday my data request, Your Honor, and established that Edison had not responded to my data request, and Mr. Weissman's explanation was, if you read that, it just says we'll search for documents, not that we'll actually produce them, which is a variation on my dog ate my homework.
That's, I take exception to that remark, Your Honor, and that's not what I said. What I said was we had objected subsequent to that meet and confer. Having said that, I have no objection to Mr. Giesman ceding the time, and if there are other parties who wish to examine Mr. Palmisano, we can use the time productively, and we can come back to Mr. Giesman at a later time.
Okay. So, do you want to be heard on this, or you want to get in line?
I would like to be heard on this, Your Honor. Matt Friedman, representing Turn, F-R-E-D-M-A-N. I find myself somewhat confused about what is in scope here. In the scoping ruling, there was a specific item that was deemed to be within the scope of Phase 1, issues related to the nature and effects of steam generator failures in order to assess the reasonableness of SCE's consequential actions and expenditures. The questions Mr. Giesman's asking appear to be about the nature and effects of the steam generator failures, and they seem to be intended to understand the reasonableness of Edison's consequential actions. I thought this was in Phase 1. If it's not in Phase 1, where does it live now?
I guess I have a different interpretation of Mr. Giesman's questions. Mr. Giesman's questions seem to me to be asking this witness to climb inside the mind of MHI and explain why MHI did or did not do certain things. 2, it's trying to interpret that these letters from Edison as admissions of certain absence of planning activities, to the extent those could ultimately be related to 2012 expenditures. Those questions are appropriate. What's not is to get into the details of the causes and effects. The question is, we know what happened. We know there were tubes. We know there was a leak. We now know that there are things that you do that they have chosen to do. You can take issue with whether they're reasonable to do, but you don't need to identify whether there is a plan going forward for the future of the steam generators in order to determine what was appropriate in March or July or November of 2012. To the extent you've got a letter that has some admission or has some information that relates to the expenditures, fully within Phase 1. What is curious to me is I just don't think that we're going to get very far in 2012 based on repair proposals that come from Mitsubishi for the long term that arrive in December, because it goes to the future of operation of the plant, Phase 3. It's going to go to expenditures after 2012, except for perhaps a week or two, unless Mr. Giesman or someone is able to make a linkage to something in 2012.
I understand, Your Honor. I guess then my concern would be that in a subsequent phase, parties might be precluded from asking about actions in 2012.
I don't know where you got that idea. The Phase 3 covers everything from the steam generator replacement project's commencement forward, including the future of the plant. So I'm not sure where you get that idea.
Okay, I appreciate your clarification.
Okay. And unless we're on my ruling, Judge Dudney's in charge. Are we on my ruling?
I'd like to weigh in on this. I'd like to just emphasize the fact that we are talking about 100, at least, that we know of that Edison has copped to, $130 million of O&M costs that were spent above their authorized level in 2012, correct?
Yes, and which will be up for final review in Phase 3.
Whether those dollars were reasonably spent in 2012 or not?
And what goes into that decision-making is not something that happened in November or December of 2012, does not affect the decision-making in January, March, or July. It's a matter of timing.
But I will say that asking about Edison decision-making throughout 2012 is a valid
Which is exactly what I said, Ms. Sullivan. Okay, so...
Your Honor, I do have a procedural question that I think relates to at least something you said yesterday with respect to SCE 16.
Okay.
You indicated in response to Mr. Friedman that you would be reading the unredacted version of SCE 16 in determining the appropriateness of the redactions.
Yeah, Mr. Giesman, I did actually read both side by side yesterday. Go ahead.
And have you had an opportunity to determine whether these redactions are appropriate or not?
Let me answer a different question. I think the redacted information is not necessary for phase one of this proceeding.
And with respect to the two attachments, the one that you referred to as a Gantt chart, in asking Mr. Perez questions, and then the attachment 3, you don't feel that those redactions are appropriate or relevant to phase one?
Yeah, I think that's generally true. I'll admit that I didn't get through attachment 3 in great detail, but everything prior to that in the letter, yes, I think is not necessary for phase one.
When do you think you would be prepared to make such a determination on attachment 3?
Go ahead.
I think that it is not relevant to phase one. We can have these arguments about what is relevant in phase 3 in terms of looking at root causes. What we have in this attachment is a ranking of options that are being presented in the last 2 weeks of 2012, which indicates that no actions are being taken yet because they're still being analyzed, which only goes to further support that it's not relevant to phase one. You can ask them if there's any actions they took in connection to what was recommended in 2012 and made any expenditures in 2012. But everything in this exhibit suggests that it's all 2013 and beyond.
Your Honor, aren't you suggesting that someone driving down the road with his windshield completely blacked out could be acting reasonable?
I don't accept your metaphor. I think you need to move on, Mr. Giesman.
Well, I will request the opportunity to cede my time and come back later. Permissible questions when it comes my turn again.
All right.
Very good. Are there other parties who wish to cross-examine Mr. Palmisano?
On these exhibits.
On these exhibits, yes. Mr. Friedman?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Palmisano.
Good afternoon.
I'm Matt Friedman, representing the Utility Reform Network. And I'd like thank you. I'd like to turn to Exhibit SCE 16, page 7 of that exhibit, or it's marked page 7 of the presentation.
Give me 1 minute to...
Off the record. Mr. Friedman is about to ask a question on page 7 of Exhibit 16, which is titled 1.2 Repair or Replacement Method as Candidate for Recovery Action.
Mr. Palmisano, there are 4 options listed on this page for options for repair or replacements. These are the 4 proposals that were made by Mitsubishi to Edison for possible fixes at units 2 and 3. Is that right?
Give me 1 minute to read the cover memo, please. The December 14th memo.
Okay. Off the record. And back on the record. Go ahead, Mr. Friedman.
I think I had a question pending, Your Honor, which is, do these 4 options represent 4 possible strategies proposed by Mitsubishi for repairs at the Unit 2 and 3 steam generators?
Yes, they appear to be what on December 14th in the cover letter MHI is proposing they discuss with Southern California Edison as far as options.
During the course of 2012, did Edison expend any funds to consider other options apart from those that are described on this slide?
Repeat that, the door swung there. I couldn't hear clearly.
During 2012, did Edison expend any funds to pursue or consider other options apart from those that are listed on this page?
Well, what you're seeing on this page are options that MHI has developed. We staffed our group starting July 27th and considered options by Mitsubishi. We did searches of industry experience to help prepare ourselves to evaluate MHI's options. So we had some staff hours and related expenditures that we spent preparing to evaluate MHI's options and discussing things with MHI through the second half of the year.
I guess my question is, did Edison develop other options beyond those listed on this page?
As far as the long-term repair, we did not develop other options. We have been working with MHI as the warranty party, the party responsible under the warranty.
And in this presentation, MHI Is it fair to say that MHI ruled out what's listed as option 2 as non-feasible?
Just 1 minute. When I read the cover letter, if I can take you to the cover letter, if you go to the last paragraph, I haven't gone through the whole PowerPoint. I'm looking at the last paragraph of their letter to us. Mitsubishi, and I'll paraphrase, accordingly, Mitsubishi concludes that both the thicker AVB repair and replacement of the entire 2 bundles / entire steam generator are technically viable. That first sentence of that last paragraph, that would appear to be what MHI is telling us at that point in terms of where they are on ruling in or ruling out options. Now, again, I haven't had time to go through the whole PowerPoint, but it looks like that's option 1 and options 3 and 4.
And keeping that slide in front of you, I'd like you to also turn to what's been marked as Exhibit SCE 15, which is the December 20th letter to Mr. Avella.
I have that in front of me.
The very last sentence on the first page of that letter states that we also understand that based on our discussion at the December 14, 2012 meeting, SCE has rejected our option number 1.
I see that sentence.
Do you know why Edison rejected Mitsubishi's preferred option?
I don't have the specifics at my fingertips. I know we are questioning on option 1 the feasibility of it effectively restoring the steam generators to the criteria that we had identified up front back in November.
By when, I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I don't have the information at my fingertips, is what I said. We did have questions on option 1, whether it would fully meet the criteria we had previously laid out in other correspondence. And I would emphasize we've made no final decisions on which option that MHI has proposed. There is more work to be done.
So Edison didn't actually reject option 1?
Don't have that information at my fingertips. I'm reading the letter. I see what MHI says, but I don't have anything in hand to confirm that. What I'm telling you is we had questions on option 1.
And on the last page of the December 20th letter, about midway through the page, there's a sentence where Mitsubishi preliminarily estimates that the schedule for both of these options, I think those are options 3 and 4, would take 5.5 years for the first unit. Do you see that?
I do see that.
And those were Edison's preferred options at this time, were they not?
Your Honor, I'm sorry, Mr. Friedman, but I am going to register an objection to scope. Again, I don't mind giving Mr. Friedman, some latitude here, but it does need to be linked to some 2012 costs.
Your Honor, for me, this is really about understanding whether or not Edison believed that the only strategy that was viable would involve a 5 to 6 year delay, and in that context, whether or not actions that they took in 2012 were reasonable, if in fact Edison believed that it would be at minimum 5 to 6 years before there was any permanent fix that was possible.
Well, shouldn't you establish when they knew that?
That is what I'm doing right now, Your Honor.
All right. Overruled for now, but Mr. Friedman, please try to get to the connection.
Could we go off the record for just a second? Where are you, Matt, on this letter?
All right. Off the record.
Actually, yeah, which exhibit?
Go ahead, Mr. Friedman.
Thank you. Did Edison have the belief at any point in 2012 that it would be possible to pursue what are referred to as options 3 and 4 on a more expedited timeline than the one listed here?
Let me clarify, you're asking me, did we have a belief on it that the timeline could be expedited compared to what MHI is quoting?
Yes.
We had not really explored expediting a timeline. Again, we're working with MHI to define options and expect them to define options timeline, and then once an option is selected and approved, we'll work on the specifics.
And just to clarify, Edison, during the course of 2012, had not identified any options that would meet your criteria, which could be implemented in a short period of time.
Well, again, MHI is the one working on identifying and proposing the options. Edison's work has been to benchmark what others have done successfully so we can better judge MHI's proposals.
Okay. I think those are all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Friedman. Ms. Sullivan, would you like to cross-examine Mr. Palmer?
We would like to ask some questions of Mr. Palmer. Ray Lutz is going to...
Okay.
All right. Go ahead, Mr. Lutz.
Thank you. Put it on the side. Okay, I'm going to be as brief as possible, knowing that I spent a long time yesterday. These questions are to relate the reasoning used for the actions taken in 2012 by Edison and the $130 million spent in OEM over and above the level that was not authorized, but there's an interim allocation. If we look at SCE 10, the timeline, I'd like to work our way through some of the benchmarks in this timeline. Let's try to reconstruct what happened. On 3-1,
Could you give me a page number
Oh,
reference?
yeah, I'm sorry.
in
This is in
SE 10?
SE 10, it's at the back. It's page 64, 65, and 66.
Thank you, I have that now.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Are you familiar with this timeline?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you. If we look at the entry for 3/1/2012, it says U2 fuel move to core from fuel pool completed. Did I read that accurately?
Yes, you did.
Okay. When did the U2 move to core from fuel pool start?
I don't have the start date, and it's not on the timeline. Typically, that's about a 7-day evolution, but we don't have that on the specific timeline.
Okay, so 7 days, probably?
I'm giving you a typical number from my past experience.
Would you think that it would be after the tube break in Unit 3 that you started to move the fuel?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, why did Edison choose to move the fuel into the core after the Unit 3 emergency?
Okay. The Unit 2 was in a planned refueling outage, which started, I believe, around January 9th, first entry on the timeline. So when you see the 3/1 date, that was in accordance with the Unit 2 refueling outage schedule. And the tube leak in Unit 3 occurred January 31st. Unit 3 would have been in the process of being inspected. We continued the normal refueling outage activities on Unit 2 at that point. So that's why we put the core back from the fuel pool into the reactor in Unit 2 on that date.
So even though there was an emergency that shut down the other unit with a new steam generator of the same design from the same vendor, and that had run longer than the one that had just caused an emergency, you just went ahead with the refueling as planned. Was there any, let me ask this, was there any discussion that you know of to save some money and not put the fuel into the core?
Object to the form of the question as compound.
Please rephrase the question.
Let me see if I can split that up. Was there any discussion about not moving the fuel into the core at that time?
There was no discussion that I'm aware of from deviating with the planned outage schedule for Unit 2 at that point.
Okay. Would that have saved any money?
I would have to conjecture probably not. All the contractors are mobilized and are on site at that point. In fact, it probably would have incurred extra cost to demobilize.
So not putting it in would cost the same as putting it in, the way you schedule your workers? Is that the way you're saying?
What I'm referring to is for a refueling outage, you mobilize not only your own workforce, but you have significant contract workforce on site to execute your work, in this case in about a 60-day period. And at the time we were reloading the core on Unit 2 in accordance with the schedule, we did not have enough information out of Unit 3 to make any different decision. So the prudent course was to continue the plan, and then ultimately we decided not to restart Unit 2 as we learned more about Unit 3.
Is there any, if you move the fuel into the core, does that mean it's unusable or unsaleable, or does it reduce the value of the fuel in any way? Like if you put it in, then you could not take it back out and maybe resell it or recondition it somehow so it could get some money out of it if you never use it?
What part of the fuel are you referring to?
Well, the part that you moved into the core at that time.
Okay, so that is both partially used fuel and new fuel assembly. So which part would you be referring to?
I'm not sure. Is there a difference between those two in your answer?
Well, the fuel that has been, in a typical refueling, you take a third to a half of the fuel out every cycle and replace it with fresh fuel. So half to a third to two-thirds of the fuel going back in has been partially used. So that is radioactive. It cannot be sold, cannot be moved off-site. So that's not a candidate for what you're asking. If you're asking, the new fuel assemblies that are uniquely designed and built for San Onofre really are not viable for any other plant. So there's really no difference between, once it's in the fuel pool ready to reload the core, there's not an option really to pull it out and ship it somewhere else.
Okay. Let's go down to April 20th in this timeline. And it says that at that point, you had the Unit 2 tube-to-tube wear inspection letter to NRC. I imagine that means that you sent it to NRC. And then after that, on the 23rd, it says the Unit 2 first tube wear root cause analysis was issued by SCE. Do you see that in the timeline?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Apparently, this report disclosed some tube-to-tube wear in the Unit 2 steam generators and other wear similar but not as extensive as the Unit 3 steam generator. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, I would need to see the letter. I just have a line entry here on the chronology. I would need to see what the letter said.
Okay, but wasn't it the case at that time, or wasn't it the case in 2012, you did reach the realization that that Unit 2 did have similar wear, although not as extensive as occurred in the Unit 3?
Yes, we identified two tubes in Unit 2 that had signs of tube-to-tube wear, much less extensive, but certainly told us the potential existed for Unit 2.
Okay. And the root cause analysis was issued for Unit 2 on April 23rd, 2012.
Correct.
According to this. When was the root cause analysis for, well, I guess I have it down here. At the bottom, the 5/7/2012, it says U3 first tube wear root cause analysis issued. So it was issued after. And why was the Unit 2 root cause analysis done before the Unit 3? Since the Unit 3 was the one with the emergency and we're really worried about what actually happened, why did you put one before the other?
The Unit 2 data was, the Unit 2 inspection occurred earlier as part of the planned inspection for the refueling outage. For some perspective, Unit 2 ran a full cycle with new steam generators were required to do 100% tube inspection. And that inspection identified the high amounts of normal wear. It identified the retainer bar wear, so we fairly quickly then started a root cause on that identified wear in Unit 2. Then when we identified the tube-to-tube wear in Unit 3, we initiated that root cause. So it's just a matter of when the data was discovered. That's why the sequence was the way it was.
So by April 23rd, then isn't it the case that Edison knew that Unit 2 had tube-to-tube wear and substantial other tube wear due to the retaining bars and support structures inside the steam generator? Is that?
Yes.
Great. Okay. And then in June, the timeline shows the planning began. So this is on the next page. The planning begins to place in June. It doesn't give a date in June, just 6/2012. It says U3 planning begins to place the unit in preservation mode. You see that entry?
I do see that.
Okay. With later, we see down here October 1st, 2012, U3 reactor defueling begins. Do you see that entry?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thanks. So after April 23rd, it was clear that Unit 2 had substantial problems and Unit 3 was targeted for preservation mode. Did SCE perform any deliberate cost-effectiveness analysis to assess all reasonable options, including total decommissioning of songs?
My role was to lead the technical work related to both units, particularly the steam generators. I was not involved in any cost-effective or cost analysis of options at that point.
Are you aware of any cost effectiveness analysis in Edison in that time frame regarding the decisions that you were making for with regard to these units?
I'm not aware of any analyses in that time frame.
Was there any analyses done in the entirety of 2012 regarding the decisions that were made? A deliberate analysis.
The corporation is certainly looking at the long-term future, and I think under general rate case scenarios, looking at different options and the cost effectiveness of different options for the SONGS units. I'm not directly involved. I'm aware that they're doing that because I provide information to that process.
So when the decision was made to put the planning begins to place a unit in preservation mode, how did that happen? Who did that? And I mean, how do you come about that decision? That's a pretty big decision, isn't it?
Well, it is, and let me give you some context. In that March to April to May to June time frame, we were able to fully characterize the Unit 2 steam generator condition. Okay. And we characterized fully the Unit 3 steam generator condition. And the way I would tell you, the principal focus is on the unique tube-to-tube wear as the principal reason the plants needed to remain shut down under the confirmatory action letter. The other amounts of wear with respect to Unit 2 especially are manageable. The plant can be operated. We have industry experience on how to monitor that and trend that. But the tube-to-tube wear needed to be dealt with prior to restart, and that was what we committed to in the confirmatory action letter. As we looked at the depth of the analysis we needed, we decided to focus on Unit 2. Get back to my earlier comment about segregating my team, one team to focus on restart in the short term, the other long-term options for Unit 3. And then as we looked at the sequence, it was important to protect the asset, and that's what a preservation mode, and the earlier witness talked about preservation, long-term layup. There's a lot of experience in the industry in nuclear and fossil plants. If you don't pay attention when you're offline for an extended period of time and lay your systems up properly, you can run into degradation and corrosion because the systems are idle and exposed to air. So that's what the preservation plan is. So we decided that Unit 3 would not restart in the near term. It was more appropriate to put it in a layup or preservation mode and ultimately defuel it as we focused on restart for Unit 2.
Okay. In your answer, you said you decided, or we decided to do that. Was that done at a lower level, or did that actually climb up to upper levels of management and the decision-making process?
Up through the chief nuclear officer and, that level.
The higher-level management ever try to make any assessments as to the decisions that were being made by lower-level people?
Higher-level management was regularly briefed, because I was part of those briefings. Whether they made any assessments, I couldn't comment on. I was not involved in any assessments they may have done.
In the recent questioning, we were looking at the SEE 21. I just want to take a divergence here for a second. This letter that happened late in the year regarding the repairs of SONGS Units 2 and 3 steam generators. Was this the first communication from SEE to MHI about the need for a repair plan?
Not at all.
When did you start talking to MHI and demanding a fix?
We started talking to MHI very quickly after the tube leak occurred and the data was identified in Unit 3 in terms of both short-term restart support, first of all, characterization of what the cause of the issue was, because MHI had to determine that as well as us. And then we started regular discussions at various levels with MHI about both short-term actions as well as long-term actions.
I noticed that in some of these letters, I don't know if it's this one, but you gave them a 15-day deadline. That sounds pretty good for trying to get a response. Did you give them a 15-day deadline early on and get any response from them?
We did not give them a 15-day deadline early on. We and they, and I think the industry, recognized the unique nature of this fluid elastic instability and the damage it caused. And that takes adequate time for capable technical people to do eddy current examinations, look at the results, model the results, understand them. So early on, there needed to be adequate time to do that work.
On 423, we discussed the fact that you had received the Unit 2 root cause analysis, or you had completed that. Did you give MHI a 15-day deadline at that point? Because at that point you knew what the cause was, and they should get going on it, don't you think?
The 423 report identified the causes of the wear. I'm sorry. This 423 report identified the cause of the wear we found in Unit 2. We completed the evaluation of both units for tube-to-tube wear in the Unit 3 root cause report, so we did it in one place, and that was 5/27, I believe.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry, 5/7/2012.
Okay, you're right, 5/7. So let's move up to that point.
And so
after
that-
the 5/7 and you had both of them done, did you contact MHI and give them a 15-day deadline?
We were in discussions with MHI about the need for them to then propose what short-term and long-term actions would be appropriate based on the cause. But again, this is a complex activity, and on 5/7 or 5/7/2012, we understand the cause to be fluid elastic instability. The fix for that is not a 15-day effort to determine the engineering behind that. So we did not give them a 15-day deadline at that point.
So what kind of deadline did you give them? Because it looks like the next letter was on the end of November. Was it a 6-month deadline?
I don't recall if we gave them a deadline in May, and as I think you saw in the other exhibit, there were letters earlier than November 28th.
Don't you consider time to be of the essence in this matter?
Time is important, certainly.
Okay. On the timeline, we noticed that there are many times when the Unit 2 restart was slipped. There's probably half a dozen places here. I see at 314, well actually 313 is maybe the first reference one. It says schedule slip from 320 to 415. There was probably earlier a slip from the original return to service on 3.4 to 320. That wasn't in there. But there's a number of other places where it was slipped maybe a month at a time. Do you remember those changes in schedule?
Yes, I do.
Is it true that changing a schedule like this costs money?
On what basis?
Whenever you reschedule something, does it cost money to replan and try to find out what would happen? Is there any cost to changing a schedule?
It would depend on the activity that you're talking about. These schedules were based on our ability to complete our technical work as SCE, supported by our various vendors, including MHI, and submit a response to the confirmatory action letter. So what drove these schedule changes for the restart date was the amount of time we needed to do the appropriate technical work to assure Unit 2 would be safe at 70% power, and we had the analytical work done to support that, which ultimately resulted in the confirmatory action letter submittal on October 3rd of 2012. So we sent target dates along the way, and as we got deeper into the work and realized both the complexity and depth we needed, we changed the schedule several times to reflect that.
Okay, one more question. Later in the year, I see October 20th, 2012, it says Unit 2 achieves Mode 4. What does that mean?
Okay, along the line of the earlier question of the previous witness, that's one of the modes identified in our license and technical specifications. So Mode 4 represents the temperature and pressure that the primary system is at.
And there's a term that's used by the NRC for that mode?
I don't have it at my fingertips. The previous witness, I think, read that into the
I think
record.
that's called cold shutdown, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
I think Mode 5 is cold shutdown off the top of my head. But
Okay.
again, I'd have to see the previous list that the previous witness had.
Okay, you're right, it's mode 5. This is when you started to do some testing. You raise it up to mode 3 on 1023 using the additional, there were some additional boilers that were purchased for that testing?
We rented an auxiliary boiler to provide steam for the secondary side, so we could take the plant from mode 5, which is basically temperature-wise below 200 degrees, up to mode 3, full temperature and pressure, which was allowed under the confirmatory action letter to allow us to do some post-outage testing and take advantage of that opportunity. And then we returned the plant, as you can see on 1027, to mode 5. So we heated the plant up, did some testing, and then cooled the plant back down.
And what was the results of that test?
Well, there are multiple tests. You know, whenever you have a refueling outage, you do thousands of jobs, some of which need the plant at temperature and pressure to do your final post-maintenance test. Generally, they were all satisfactory, or we identify minor things which would be typical out of any refueling outage.
But this wasn't normally planned, because this was not in the refueling outage.
No, it was not. This was because of the continued nature of the outage that we took this opportunity.
Did you test this to see if it would run at 70% rate? Because that's what I thought it was for.
No. The confirmatory action letter prevents us from entering mode 2.
I realize that, but
Okay,
you maybe simulate.
No, the plant cannot get to 70% power in mode 3 at full temperature and pressure. Your power production systems don't have steam flow to run it at that power level. So that was not the purpose of that.
Okay, so then on 1027 you went back into mode 5, which I think that was the cold shutdown.
Correct.
All right. Now was Unit 2, was there any other modes that Unit 2, did Unit 2 ever go into mode 3 or more during the entirety of 2012?
Well, this period we just talked about, I think you just said it.
Yeah.
Okay. Left mode 5, proceeds through mode 4 to mode 3, full temperature and pressure, and then cooled back down to mode 4 and back down to mode 5.
Okay, thank you. That's the end of my question.
Thank you. Now, it is 4 p.m., so let's go off the record for a moment and discuss what we...
You want to recap, Sean?
Go ahead.
All right, so first thing in the morning, Mr. Marcus from Turn for Edison's Cross, followed by Mr. Bertocco for Edison's Cross, followed by a return by Mr. Palmisano to finish out Ms. George's cross-examination. But she reserved 30 minutes, but I understand that some of that time is flowed in from your Perez time. All right, and then after that we will go to Mr. Snow, which shouldn't take too long, and if Mr. Warden is really lucky, we'll get to him late in the day. All right, any questions? All right, we'll see you all tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.